Yeah.
So, welcome everybody to the Statistical Physics Journal Club Talks. Today we have with us Sujit Kumar Nath from University of Leeds, and he'll be talking about branching processes and how one understands the basic reproduction number by it. Over to you, Sujit.
Yeah. Thank you, Ayan, for the introduction. And so what I am going to talk about is basically very basic theory of branching process and how it can be used in many in explaining many natural phenomena like propagation of infectious disease in population and multiplication of bacteria in a bacterial colony and cosmic ray showers, etc. I mean, it has enormous applications in natural sciences. And most of the thing what I am going to talk about is basically textbook materials, and sometimes I have added some of my inputs as well. So most of the things are available in textbooks on branching processes, but I realized that, I mean, in typical statistical physics courses and in fact in probability theory courses as well, this topic is not covered, but I found this theory, I mean, enormously beautiful. So that's why I thought that it might be worthwhile to talk about it. So that's why I decided this topic. So first of all, let me tell you what is branching process. So branching process is quite a natural phenomena which is occurring almost everywhere in nature. Like in this case, it can be deterministic branching process where a particle like this red particle here, each red particle is branching into similar kind of red particles. It is I mean, it is kind of cell division. So every particle gives rise to similar kind of particles. Here each red particle is giving rise to two similar kind of red particles, and so on. So this kind of branching process is called deterministic branching process, and here it is very easy to track down how many, I mean, what is the population size will be after nth generation. For example, third generation, it's like, in this case it's 2 to the power n if we count the size of the nth generation. But another kind of branching process, which is our main interest today, is random branching process, where the particles divides randomly in random numbers basically. So in this case, the zeroth generation particle can give rise to 1, 2, 3, 4, or many particles with some probabilities, and of course there is randomness. So this kind of branching process is called random branching. So today will be mainly focusing on this random branching process, and we'll be getting the distributions of various generations. I mean, like what is the number after nth generation, and whether something is going extinct or not, things like that. I mean, and this theory is applied to evolutionary biology and other places, cosmic ray showers, and so many places it is applied. So this is another motivation, like we can model the propagation of infection in a population as a branching process as well. So here sorry, here these green dots are basically the susceptible population which is roaming around in a society, and this red dot was the initial infected person, and this person is interacting with other susceptible persons and making them infected. So, and if I just filter out these red dots from this whole population, this will give rise to another kind of branching process, and you can easily understand this must be random because the interaction and transmission of infection is totally a random process. So this kind of branching process will be random branching process. And right now I think everybody is familiar of the term R naught. So R naught is basically the number which is the mean or the average number of newly infected person created by an existing infected individual. So that is basically called the reproduction number R naught, and this is a predictive parameter about the fate of the infection in the population. So when the R naught is greater than equal to 1, we will see that the infection will definitely die out in the population. But when R naught when R naught is less than 1, less than equal to 1, I guess, yeah, right. So it will die out, and when R naught is greater than 1 strictly, then the infection grows exponentially. That we'll see later. I mean, how we can conclude like this. So this is the main motivation of studying branching process. Now let me tell you a little bit about the history. So in the beginning of 19th century in England itself, so Victorians were concerned about their, I mean, they observed that their family name is dying, family names are dying out in the society. I mean, after few generations, they cannot find anybody which who carries their titles or their surnames rather. So they found that aristocratic surnames are gradually dying out in the society. And at that time, people did not bother about thinking about so-called lower class people, what is happening to them, whether their surnames are also dying out or not. So they did not bother about that. So they decided that when some intellectual power or intellectual capability or physical comfort increases in someone's life, then their fertility diminished. So they very crudely associated their fertility with their intellectual capacity or physical comfort of persons. But in the year of 1873, first this person, Sir Francis Galton, who observed that this phenomena of dying out of surnames in the society is a general phenomena, and it is happening to all, not only aristocrat families. It is happening to lower class or working class families as well. I mean, sorry, I am talking about many classes, but yeah, I mean, then they used to divide their society in the classes, and yeah, so Galton first observed that it is happening to everyone. I mean, every surname, and then he formalized this problem as a mathematical problem in the Educational Times. This is a science magazine kind of thing. So see, he first this formalized this problem as a mathematical problem. He posed this problem, and in the next issue, I guess Henry William Watson came with a solution. So what Galton suggested is like the dynamics you can see in these two pictures. So what happens here, that our surname is carried over, because most of the places still the society is patriarchal. So our surname in the society propagates through the surname of the males. So what happens when a male produces another male, then his surname is carried over. But when he has a girl child, then the surname is not carried over. So here the surname stops. But when a male person has another male child, then the surname carries over. Like in this example of this branching process, after this 1, 2, 3, fourth generation, the surname still survives. But in this branching process, after fourth generation, after maybe third generation, the surname dies out, because ultimately the final at the third generation, all the childs are basically girl childs, or at some point it has been stopped by a girl child, the propagation of surname. So probably this is how the extinction of surname happens in the society. So this was first posed by this problem was posed like this by Sir Francis Galton, and then Watson came with a solution, in which case, or he suggested the solution in which case the surname has much higher probability of dying out, and in which case there is lesser probability of dying out. So let me now formalize the branching process. So what do we mean by branching process in mathematical terminologies? And also please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any confusion. So please feel free to stop me.
Sujit, I had a question.
Yeah, please.
So all surnames, of course, can't die down, right? Because I mean, the population is increasing, so surnames have to. Some surnames are growing probably, and some are dying.
Yes, that happens actually. That happens, but you know, there are many complicated interactions in the society. I mean, this is very simplistic idea. So yeah, some surnames can grow exponentially as well sometimes. Yeah, but that depends on, again, I mean, who is marrying whom. I mean, that's complicated dynamics.
Right, but then I don't
Yeah.
understand what is the I mean, finally, what is the problem that one wants to understand? Because extinction of surnames, I mean, like some surnames are becoming extinct, but some are not. So one just wants to understand why some surnames become extinct, or maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, that is the I mean, matter of discussion of this talk. I mean, when we can say that this surname might I mean, is highest probable to go extinct.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is Kavita Jain. Can I add to what Abhishek asked?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yes. Yeah, so there is a simple criteria about the growth of the population, which is the average number of offspring should be larger than one.
Correct,
And then
absolutely.
in that case, that original surname that he is starting with single individual, that population will grow exponentially. Otherwise, it will die out.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not want to tell it ahead because that is the final conclusion of my talk. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for telling this. But yeah, so that is the point. So we will find out the condition when the surname will die out and when it will not. And we will see that it will grow exponentially actually. Yeah. So that I will come at the end actually. So that is the whole point of studying this branching process, theory of branching process. Yeah, thank you. So Abhishek, so can I continue now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So first, let me formalize I mean, branching process. So this is basically the definition of branching process. So the first thing is we consider particles which are able to produce the particle of the same kind, as you have seen already. And a single particle forms the original ancestor. Single particle is known as the ancestor particle, is called as ancestor particle, and that is the 0th generation of that branching. And every particle with probability pk can gives rise to k number of particles, where k can be any non-negative integral value like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And the direct descendants of nth generation form the n plus first generation. Like the particles which are produced by second generation is called the third generation particle. And the final point is the particles of each generation act independently of each other. Like when I say that one particle can give rise to 4 particles with probability p4, then it is applicable for every other particles as well. I mean, they are independently they can generate similar kind of particles and same distributions. Basically their distributions are identically distributed. Now the typical questions we ask in branching process theory is like, what is the size of the nth generation? So this is a random process. In deterministic branching process, it is very easy to understand, but in random process, it requires some calculation to understand what is the size of the nth generation, and also whether the offsprings go extinct at the end when the number of generation goes to a large value. After a large number of generation, whether those particles go extinct or not, and what is the probability that particles go extinct after a finite number of generation, like suppose 10th generation the particle will go extinct. And there are many more, I mean, fabulous interesting questions, but these 3 questions are typically we ask in branching process. So this is the mathematical definition of branching process. Now the main weapon to attack the problem of branching process is generating function. So let me introduce generating function very briefly. It has a huge theory because this is basically a power series. So the whole power series theory applies for it. So let me first introduce what is generating function. It is a quite general thing. Suppose ai is a sequence of complex number where I belongs to the set of all non-negative integers, and we define the generating function for this sequence ai as this power series where z is a complex number. So this is basically summation of a1 sorry a0 plus a1 z1 plus a2 z square, a3 z cube, all these terms, sum of all these terms. So this is a power series, and since this is a power series, we can easily find out its radius of convergence. Like when the modulus of z is less than some number, this power series will converge, we know from mathematical theory. And also we know that in the circle of, inside the interior of the circle of convergence, which will be an open set, so this power series can be differentiated term by term. So if I take the first derivative of gz, that will be basically equal to derivative of each term. So in this case, the nth term derivative will give rise to n into an into z to the power n minus 1, and so on. So basically we can term by term differentiate it inside in the interior of the circle of convergence. And this definition of generating function can be applied to probabilities as well, probability distributions. Like now we have the sequence as probability of getting n number of, small n number of particles, which is denoted as small pn, and we can define the corresponding generating function gs as p0 plus p1s plus p2s square, and so on. This series is called the generating function for this probability distribution, and it is very easy to calculate that it has the circle of convergence where mod s is less than equal to 1. It is a real power series, so this will be a real number, so it is a basically interval of convergence, you can say. So when mod s less than equal to 1, this power series converges. And it is very easy to understand that if I put s equal to 1 in this series, then g1 will be basically the summation of probabilities. So p0, p1, p2, p3, etc., sum of all the probabilities, and which must give rise to 1. So g1 is equal to 1. And another important point you can see here is that if I take the first derivative of it, so it will be like, okay, I think I have discussed it later, so when it will come I'll discuss, but yeah, for the time being, let's just understand that g1 equal to 1. So when I put 1 in the argument of the generating function, it will give me 1. Okay, so how to construct the generating function for an integral valued random variable? So first of all, we need to, for integral valued random variable, the probability space omega contains the discrete points, and random variables are nothing but a mapping from the probability space to the real number, line. It can be discrete or it can be continuum, but it is basically a measurable function. Forget about measurable, it is just a function from nicely behaved function from the probability space to a set of all real numbers. And for example, we are considering a coin toss, so there are two possibilities, head or tail. So we can map in our choice, like we can map head to 1 and tail to 0. So here one thing we have to understand, that we have to map the probability space to non-negative integral values. So always the range of this mapping has to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It must be non-negative integral values. And for example, suppose probability of head is p and probability of tail is q, which is 1 minus p. Then the generating function corresponding to this Bernoulli trial is this q is the probability of 0. So q into s to the power 0 plus p is the probability of 1. So p into s to the power 1. So this is the generating function of a Bernoulli trial. Similarly, the generating function for a Poisson random variable, and another thing, sorry, I have kept this I have kept the pace of the talk at very basic and the quality of the talk very basic, because so many PhD students are here, so it might be very trivial to many of you, so I'm sorry for that, but yeah, I plan to explain it for the clarity. And yeah, similarly for Poisson random variable, you have the probability of getting the number n like this, and corresponding generating function you get like this. If you just put s to the power n, multiply s to the power n with this thing and just sum up, you will get the generating function for Poisson random variable like this. Now mean of a random variable is given by the first derivative of the generating function evaluated at 1. That is very easy to understand from here, because the mean of a random variable is the probability of getting 0, which is p0 into 0, plus probability of getting 1, which is p1 into 1, and so on. So this is the mean, and we can see if I just differentiate the generating function gs, so it will, and evaluate it at 1. So this is the term wise differentiation. So you will get that this is basically given by the first derivative of generating function evaluated at 1. Yeah. So next I will explain about convolution. This I am explaining because all these things I will be using later. So convolutions and sum of, I mean deterministic sum of random variables. I mean when we know that how many random variables we are going to sum exactly. So let's say x and y are independent non-negative integral valued random, I mean whatever random variables I will be talking about here will be non-negative integral valued random variables. So, and let's say probability of getting I for x is ai, and same for y is bj, y equal to j equal to bj. And if x and y are independent, so their joint probability distribution, that is getting x equal to y and y equal to j both together, is ai into bj. Now let us define a random variable which is the sum of these two random variables s, x plus y. Now if we ask that what is the probability, what is the event s equal to r, when the sum s will be equal to r, there are many events which can give rise to x equal to r, like when x equal to 0 and y equal to r, then the sum is r. When x equal to 1 and y equal to r minus 1, then again the sum is r, and so on. So there are mutually exclusive, I mean non-intersecting events in the probability space which can give rise to the event s equal to r. So probability of s equal to r is the sum of all these probabilities because they are mutually exclusive. And all these probabilities, as x and y are independent, they are basically the multiplication of their probabilities. Like x equal to 0 is a0, y equal to r is br. So this probability of this event is a0 br, and so on. And if you just sum up, you will get what is the probability that the sum is r, which I denote here by cr. Now if I ask what is the generating function for s, this summation, the sum of random variables, what is the generating function for that, then the generating, by definition, the generating function for s is basically this power series, where cr is the probability of s equal to r. So the generating function for s is c0 plus c1 into s to the power 1 plus c2 s to the power 2, and so on. Now if I just put all the values of cr here, we can easily notice that this cr is basically the coefficient of s to the power r in the multiplication of these two polynomials, like a0 plus a1s. If I just multiply these two polynomials and collect the coefficient of s to the power r, you can easily verify that it will come out to be cr, this multiplication. So the generating function of the sum of random variables, I mean deterministic number of sum of random variables, is given by the multiplication of the generating function of individual random variables. This is basically the generating function for x, and this is generating function for y, and hence their multiplication gives rise to the generating function of their sum s. So continuing this, if I add small n number of IID random variables xi, and where n is deterministic, I know what n is, then the generating function of x1 plus x2 plus xn is given by multiplication of the same generating function, right? Because they are xi are IIDs, so the identically distributed random variables, and therefore their generating functions are also same. So in summing n number of them will give rise to a generating function which is ps to the power n, just multiplication of ps n times. Okay, now let me come to compound distribution. The compound distribution, I mean when the same kind of summation of random variables, but now I don't know how many terms I need to sum up. This, suppose there is n random variables, but capital N is now a random number. So I do not know beforehand how many random numbers I am going to sum. That number of terms is again coming from a random is again a random number and coming from a distribution. So this is the random number sum of random number of random variables. So this is called, this S, the sum of random number of random variables, is called the compound distribution or compound random variable. Now we will now try to understand what could be the generating function for such a compound random variable. Okay, so and also we assume that this number of terms n is also independent of every xi. Now, as before, the probability of the generating function for each xi variable is ps. The generating function for n, the number of terms, which is again a random variable, is gs. And let's say the generating function for s is hs. Now we are going to evaluate what hs would be. So if hj is the probability that s equal to j, then we are going to evaluate what the value of hj should be. So this probability of s equal to j can be divided into sum of probabilities, where when n, now capital N is a random variable, when capital N equal to n, then we need to sum n number of random variables, but I don't know whether capital N will be n or not, so that is a random variable. So I need to sum up all the probabilities by running over capital N, because capital N now can take 1, 2, 3, 4 many values with some probabilities. So probability of s equal to j is basically the sum of these mutually exclusive events. When capital N equal to 1, then we need to check when probability just x1 equal to 1. When capital N equal to 2, we need to check when x1 plus x2 equal to 2, and so on. X1 plus x2 equal to j, and so on. So sum of these events. Now, since all these x1, x2 up to xn and n, all of them are independent of each other, then the probability multiplies, right? So this is the probability of x1 plus xn equal to j. This is now a deterministic sum. Now I have fixed that I have capital N equal to small n. I have fixed it. And now I am multiplying what is the probability that capital N will take the value small n. So this is the multiplication of independent random variable, probabilities of independent random variables. Now if I sum over n, now you can see that this probability is just gn, because this is the distribution of capital N. Capital N can take the value small n with probability gn. So this is just, I have replaced this term as gn. So this sum is basically the value hj. Now what is the generating function of s? By definition, the generating function of s will be summation over j hj into s to the power j, right? Now if I just replace the value of hj here, then you will get, I need to sum over j, this summation is kept intact, and inside I have put, inside this bracket I have put the value of hj, and s to the power j is multiplied and summed up. Now this gn can, I can now interchange the summation. I mean, here lots of major theoretic technicalities are I mean involved, but fortunately it turns out that I can interchange this summation, order of summation, and gn comes out, and the summation inside this bracket will be like summation over j probability of x1 plus xn equal to j, where n is now a deterministic number, times s to the power j. Now as we have seen that this thing, that summation of deterministic number of random variables has a generating function. This has, sorry, this is what, this is Sn equal to, yeah, so this is just going to the previous slide. So Sn has generating function p s to the power n when the number of terms is deterministic n. So it has the form ps to the power n, right? And with every ps to the power n is multiplied gn and summation over n. So this you can see, if you can see the form of g of capital S, you can see that this term is basically g of ps. In the argument we have to put ps, because gs is gn s to the power n. In place of s, if we just replace ps, then you will get this g of ps. Yeah, so that's it. So the generating function of random number of summation of random number of random variables is given by g of ps, where g is the generating function of number of terms and p is the generating function of each individual term. Yeah, so that is all the theories. Now let me go into some applications to get some juice out of it. So let me give you an example where, suppose a plant produces n number of seeds, which is a Poisson random variable, that it produces n number of seeds with probability e to the power minus lambda into lambda to the power n by factorial n. So this is the Poisson distribution. So it can produce 1, 2, 3, 4 or many seeds with these probabilities. And for example, each seed has the probability of growing as a new plant like p, but it will die out with probability 1 minus p. Now if I ask how many offsprings will be there after the first generation, or a parent plant, how many offsprings a parent plant can have? So here there are two types of randomness. One is the number of seeds produced by this plant, which is Poisson distributed, and another is whether that seed grow or not. That will be determined by a Bernoulli trial with probability p of success and 1 minus p of failure. So this is nothing but again the sum of random number of random variables, where n is the number of seeds produced by that plant, and all these xi's are IID random variables with having Bernoulli distribution, that probability xi equal to 1, that when a seed, a single seed, suppose this x1 is grows as a new plant, then we need to put it 1. But when x2 fails, then we need to put it 0. So, and that has some probability p and 1 minus p. So this is again a random sum of random number of random variables, and that sum over the number of seeds, which is capital N, and this is a Poisson distributed random variable. Now the generating function of n, we have seen that for Poisson distribution, we got that generating function for n is e to the power minus lambda plus lambda s, which is gs, and the generating function for each individual xi is this ps, because this is the probability of failure times s to the power 0, which is 1, and probability of success times s to the power 1. So this is the generating function for Bernoulli random variable. Therefore, the generating function for this random sum of random variables is given by g of ps. We just studied in the previous slide. So if you just compose g two functions g and p, it will give rise the probability of generating function for s. Now, if I ask what is the probability, so s is the number of offsprings of a single plant, which is a random quantity. Now, if I ask what is the probability that the number of offsprings will be k, so this probability can be given by just the kth term of the Taylor series expansion, because this is a power series, and since Taylor series expansion is unique and it has a power series expansion in Taylor series, so just the coefficient of s to the power k is basically the probability of s equal to k in the generating function of g of ps, or the probability of this random sum. So if I just collect the kth coefficient of the Taylor series expansion of this compound generating function, then I get the probability of s to the power k. And if I just plot that, I mean, this plot is basically for different parameters. When the number of seeds, average number of seeds is 30, and probability of growing as a new plant is 20%, and so on. And for the blue curve, the average number of seed produced is 20, and probability of getting as going as a new plant as 60%. So you can see that as the probability of living grows, then the probability of getting higher number of plants increases, right? Yeah. So this is one example where we can apply the compound, generating function for compound distribution. So we can now tell with some probability that what will be the number of offsprings of a single plant. Okay, now the two most important question we ask in generating function, that is, what is the number of offsprings at the nth generation, not in the first generation or for a single plant. What is the number of offsprings after nth generation, when there will be many particles producing in the first generation, second generation, there will be many number of particles producing the similar kind of particles, and they will be summed up, right? So we need to calculate what is the number of offsprings after, say, 10th or 12th generation, and whether the species goes extinct or not. So these two are main questions we ask. So for example, where intuitively we cannot say the result. Suppose these are two species of plants. While the species one produces average number of seeds, average 8 seeds they produce, and among them 12% of seeds survive. And another species, they produce average number of seeds, which is 6, which is lesser than this, but they have little bit higher number of survival, which is 20%. Now what we want to ask, whether these two plants will live on earth forever or not. I mean, is there any possibility that they will go extinct? So this kind of question we want to answer in branching process. Yeah, so this is just a recall, so which I am now going to use it repeatedly. So if xi's are random variables with each having generating function ps, and if we sum up n number of random variables where n is another random variable with generating function gs, then the sum of random number of random variables, which is s, the generating function of s is given by g of ps, composition of g and p. So composition of generating function of this number of term, which is capital N, G, composition P of individual term, the generating function of individual terms. Okay, now let me answer the question, how many offsprings will be there at nth generation? So we now have each particle produces x number of offsprings, where x is a random number and which has the generating function ps, p0 plus p1s plus p2 square, and so on. So each term has the generating function ps. So the number of first generation progenies, or the offsprings, the number of offsprings after just at first generation will have the same generating function ps, because at the 0th generation I am assuming that it starts with only one particle. So one particle gives rise to few number of offsprings, and that is distributed as x. So that number as the number is x, and that corresponding generating function is ps. So the first generation progeny, for the first generation progenies, the generating function will be same, right? Because they are created by a single particle. Now what happens in the second generation? Now in the second generation particles are created by the first generation particles, right? So now in the first generation there were only one single particle, so n0 equal to 1. In the second generation there are n1 number of particles. Now that distribution of n1 is given by this generating function. Now what happens in the second generation, sorry, this is the first generation, and what happens in the second generation? So these second generation particles are created by these n1 number of first generation particles. So for each of them creates x number of particles, So we need to sum of x number of particles for each n1 particles, right? So for the second generation, we have to sum up x1 plus x2 plus dot 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 plus xn1 number of terms, because there were n1 number of particles in the first generation. So in the second generation, all of them will contribute and by producing new particles. So we have to sum up x1 plus x2 plus xn1. So just now we studied that the generating function for the second generation can be easily obtained by just by composing p of ps, because this n1 has the generating function ps and each individual has generating function x. So each individual x has generating function ps also. So it is basically composition of g of ps. Now here g equal to again p, so p of ps. Again, what happens at the nth generation or maybe third generation, for example? So again, third generation will be created by second generation particles in the same way. So now we need to sum up n2 number of x, each having generating function ps. So now n2 has generating function p of ps. So we need to compose another ps inside this p, so that we get the generating function for the third generation, and so on. So if I just ask that how many number of particles at the nth generation, so nth generation particles will be created by n minus 1th generation, and the corresponding generating function will be obtained just by composing them gradually. So now what we have obtained, that we can get the generating function for any generation, which is any nth generation. So which is basically the nth iterate of p. If we just keep on composing p n times, it will give me the generating function for the nth generation. And now it is very easy to calculate how many particles will be there at the nth generation. But because if I ask how many, what is the probability that there will be only one particle after nth generation, then as you have got the generating function for the nth generation, if you just Taylor series expand it and take the coefficient of s, that will give you the probability of getting only one particle at nth generation. So we have got much hold on this process now, because we can now calculate what is the size of any generation. So let me come back to plant model again. So I have called it Poisson-Bernoulli plant because there are the number of seeds is produced as a random Poisson distributed random variable, and each having probability of survival as Bernoulli. So the generating function after third generation is now for a single plant, the next generation have size with generating function ps of this form. We calculated it before. So after third generation, it is just 3 times iterate of p. So p of ps. So this is the generating function after third generation. So now if I just plot for these two species, suppose for the first species the average number of seeds produced is 5 and 40% of them survive, and the second one average number of again 5 but 18% of them survive. Then sorry, I just commuted these two thing. So yeah, this is for this actually 18% of them survive, and for this 40% of them survive. So this is now the probability of the first, second and third generation. So black, red and blue are the probabilities of first, second and third generation for different plants, like, or the different species. Now one interesting thing you should notice here, that as the generation increases, like the first, second and third, the probability of going extinct, that getting zero particle, for the first generation was lowest, then for the second generation is little higher, for third generation is much higher. Same thing happens here. So probability of going extinct for the first generation is lower, then for the second generation little higher, for third generation is little more higher, and so on. So as the generation number increases, the probability of going extinct is increasing. But what happens in this case, that there is a difference between these two cases, that in this case the probability of getting larger number of particles after nth generation is gradually decaying, but in this case the probability of larger number of particles is gradually increasing, right? After third generation the probability of getting 15 particles is higher than first or second generation. So there is a difference between these two, and those two are completely controlled by these two parameters, this lambda and p, like the average number of seeds they produce and what is the probability that each seed will survive. So this is how we can compute what will be the generation size at any nth generation.
I have one question.
Yeah, sure.
So these lambdas and p's are constant, like for one particular species throughout the generation, this lambda and p remain constant.
For all the generations for a single species, because suppose this is a strawberry plant or this is tomato plant, so I am assuming that for all species, for all the generations, a tomato plant can produce lambda number of seeds on average, and that is uniform over the over all the generations, and also the survival of seeds as well, that I am assuming uniform. I mean over all the generations, that should not vary over generation.
Okay.
physically, right?
No, physically I would think like it should vary, no, because at each generation, for example, the like things may change, no, like if you consider fertility in human beings, then or in any animals, like it may change through the generations, no.
Yeah, right. So in principle it should change, but that for that actually you need to take, I mean, lots of details inside it. Yeah,
No,
absolutely, you are absolutely
like
correct.
let's say in first generation you started off with some constant value of lambda and p, okay, and in the
Yeah,
second generation it remains constant, but it is different than what it was in the first generation. Then I think things
absolutely.
are computable if we do this, no, like analytically I think it is tractable.
Yes, absolutely. Analytically, it is tractable, but I mean, we need to do dirty calculations for that. Of course, you are absolutely right. Yeah, actually, in principle, we need to consider the time varying or generation varying parameters. But here, for simplicity, I have just put, I mean, let's say, I mean, over the generations, the parameter remains constant, just for simplicity. Yeah,
Okay.
but you are absolutely correct. I mean it actually varies. I mean there are lots of variations in the nature, so it actually varies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, now let us calculate what is the probability of extinction. By probability of extinction I mean what is the probability that a species will go extinct after sufficient number of generation. Now we have seen that the probability, the generating function for nth generation is given by the nth iterate of the p, that is the generating function of the first generation. So and recursively we can also see that at each generation n is basically the generating function is obtained by composing another p with the generating function of the previous generation, that is pn minus 1. So this is a recursive relation. Now if I want to ask what is the probability that there will be no offsprings at the nth generation, so that will be given by the nth if I just evaluate the nth iterate at 0, that will give you the probability of 0 offspring, right? Because the nth generation has generating function p0 times p0 plus p1s plus p2 s square and so on. So p0 is basically the constant term in that polynomial, is basically the probability of going extinct. So if I just evaluate this polynomial at s equal to 0, it will give me the constant term, and hence the number of 0 generation, sorry, the probability of getting 0 offsprings at the nth generation. And this iterate is this recursive relation is again valid for this probability of extinction as well. So xn equal to pn 0, which is p of pn minus 1 0, and Pn minus 1 0 again is the probability that the species goes extinct after n minus 1 generation, which is by definition xn minus 1. So xn is basically P of xn minus 1, and so on. Now, as P is a polynomial and every term is positive, so the derivative is positive always, and so PS is always increasing, monotonically increasing function. So x1 is P0, which is less than equal to P of x1, which is x2, because x1 is something other than 0, which is greater than, because this is a probability greater than 0. So P0 must be lower than Px1 because P is monotonically increasing, and since x1 is greater than 0, so P0 must be Px1 must be greater than 0, right? And but P of x1 is again x2. So in this recursive relation, we get x1 less than equal to x2. And if I continue this, so if x1 less than x2 and P is again a monotonically increasing function, and if I apply P on x1 and x2, then again x2 is less than equal to x3 we get. So, and this goes on. So this x1, that is the probability xn basically, which is the sequence of probabilities that the species goes extinct at the nth generation, that is an increasing sequence. So as the number of generation increases, the probability of going extinct increases. So that's what we have seen here. As the generation increases, the extinction probability increases. So this we have seen analytically as well. So this xi is an increasing sequence, and being a probability, all these xi's, it is bounded above by 1. It cannot go beyond 1. So there must exist, there is a theorem called Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, which says that a monotonically increasing which is bounded above must converge to a limit. So it has a limit, suppose L. So L is the limit when I tends to infinity. That means when we take the large number of generation, we think about large number of generations, then L is the probability whether the particles go extinct after enough number of generations or not. So this is basically the probability of extinction. Now how to calculate it? How to calculate the probability of extinction? Now we have seen that the extinction probability xn satisfies this recursive relation, that extinction probability at the nth generation is equal to the generating function evaluated at the extinction probability at n minus 1th generation. So this satisfies this recursive relation, and we know that this sequence xi has a limit. So let's take n tends to infinity in both sides. So in the left you will get L, on the right you will get P of L, because P is a continuous function. So you can just take the limit inside this argument. So L equal to PL you will get. So basically what you are getting, that this extinction probability L after enough number of generations is basically the solution of this equation x equal to px. So if you solve x equal to px, this equation, you know the form of px. Now if you just solve x equal to px equation, then you will get some number L which satisfies L equal to PL, and this is the extinction probability. So for two things can happen. Now PS is a convex set, Px is a convex function because it has all derivatives greater than equal to 0, right? So PS is a convex function, and if I consider the s equal to x line, straight line, the 45-degree angle straight line, since PS is a convex function, two things can happen. Either it will and another thing, PS will always touch this touch or intersect this straight line at 1, because P of 1 equal to always 1, because that will be the sum of probabilities, that will always be 1. And this straight line also takes s equal to x, this straight line also takes the value 1 at 1. So they will definitely meet at 1. So, and since Px is a convex function, two things can happen. Either this the function Ps is totally above this line, red line, or it intersects at some point before 1 and intersect 1 in 1 as well. So these two things can happen since px is a convex function. Now we can see, and what is the probability of extinction? That is the intersection point, because there the satisfaction of this equation happens, x equal to px, because there they intersect. So that is the extinction probability, right? So if we just plot the generating function of the first generation ps with respect to s, then we get we can exactly see where what is the extinction probability, that is the intersection point. In this case, for example, it is around 0.25, I guess, or between 0.25 and 0.3. So this way we can find the extinction probability. And another important thing we need to notice here, that when this does not intersect before 1, then the first derivative of p, which is evaluated at 1, always be less than equal to 1, because if you take the tangent of it, of tangent of ps, its slope will be always less than the slope of this diagonal line, right? So the first derivative of p evaluated at 1 always be less than equal to 1 when this does not intersect before 1. But when it intersects at some point before 1, that means when the extinction probability is less than 1. In this case, the extinction probability is 1. That means the species will go extinct with probability 1. That is for sure, it will go extinct. But in this case, the probability of extinction is something less than 1, because it intersects before 1. And in this case, you can see that as it has gone down this diagonal line, when it will intersect at 1 again, intersect this diagonal line at 1 again, it has to come up from lower side. So the slope must be greater than 1. So in this case, the probability first derivative of generating function evaluated at 1 must be greater than 1. So if you take the tangent here, then you will see that that has a slope greater than 1. That means, and what is p prime 1 then? P prime 1 basically the mean number of offsprings at the first generation, right? Because ps was the generating function for the first generation. So p prime 1 is basically the average number of offsprings produced at the first generation. So p prime 1 is a very tractable quantity. And the most important thing here is to notice that just by looking at the average number of offsprings produced at the first generation, we can make a big conclusion whether a species will go extinct or will not go extinct, or may not go extinct, whether a species will go extinct with probability 1 or not. So this generating function of the first generation tells us a lot about it, lot about the branching process. So the take home message from this slide is basically, when the number of offsprings, average number of offsprings, is less than equal to 1, then it will go extinct with probability 1. But when the average number of offsprings at the first generation is greater than 1, it may not go, it has some finite probability, I mean non-zero probability of going extinct, but not with probability 1. I mean, it has a higher probability, rather higher probability of survival as well, right? So this is the main conclusion of this slide, and this is the main one of the most important results in branching process. Okay, so now let me come to the plant example again. So what I started asking, there are two species of plants. These produced average 8 seeds, and among them 12% survived. And this plant produced average 6 number of seeds, but 20% of them survived. Now we asked that which of them, whether both of them will live on the earth forever, or one of them will go extinct or not. So intuitively, it is very difficult to it is very difficult to answer. I mean, whether one of them will go extinct or not, because in this case, the average number of seeds is larger, but the probability of survival is lower. But in this case, the average number of seeds is lower, but probability of survival is little larger. So intuitively we cannot answer this, but using generating function we can answer this, whether one of them will go extinct or not. Now in our Poisson-Bernoulli model of plant branching, or not plant branching, I mean the generations of plants, we have seen that the number of the generating function of first generation progenies is given by this function, right? So this is the generating function of the number of offsprings produced by a single plant. Now, so this is the PS in the previous slide here. So if we just press and again s equal to x, the diagonal line, then we can see for this parameter. So if I just put lambda equal to 8 and p equal to 12% or 0.12, then I can see that this function PS intersects this diagonal line only at 1, not before that. But in this case, it is intersecting at some point less than 0.5, say, and then it meets at 1. So in this case, we can say that since it is intersecting at 1 only, not before 1, the probability of extinction is exactly 1. That means this species, this strawberry plant, for example, it will go extinct with probability 1. There is no chance of survival after sufficient number of generation. It is bound to go extinct. So this happens in the evolutionary biology as well, and gene mutations as well. Sometimes genes disappear, or the surnames in the societies disappear. So this happens just because of this kind of random processes. So this all depends on how many offsprings on an average is produced by a parent or ancestor. So this answers the distribution of these plants. Now let me come back to yeah, Simon. Yeah, please.
Hi, Sujit.
Hi.
Actually, we are already above time. So how much more time would you take?
Yeah, I'll take 5 more minutes, maybe. Not 5 minutes. In fact,
Okay,
less
sure.
than 5 minutes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Coming back to Thank you. So coming back to infection propagation. So this is, I mean, infection propagation is no other than this. I mean, this is now very easy. So infection propagation, I mean, this slide basically I showed you before as well. So I think Simon was asking some questions. He raised hand, I guess.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
have a
please.
question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and the question is from the previous slide. It's just a very simple
Yeah.
question. Since
Yeah.
you have two intersections in the second plot, how do you choose the first intersection as the solution to the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very nice question. Please hold on. I will answer it. I'll answer it at the end because it needs some writing. Yeah. I am prepared for that. Yeah. Yeah. Please hold on. Yeah. Yeah. So coming back to infection propagation, the same thing happens in I mean infection propagation as well. This is again a branching process, and let's now understand that let's now recall what is the definition of R naught. It was the average number of newly created infections from an existing one. So which is basically the mean number of progenies created by an ancestor, right? So R naught is nothing but the first derivative of the generating function evaluated at 1, which is the mean of the number of offsprings at first generation. So what we have discussed by far, so whenever this mean is less than equal to 1, this population will go extinct with probability 1, right? So whenever this R naught is less than equal to 1, this must go extinct, the infection must go extinct. But when this average is greater than 1, then it keeps on growing. So that is why R naught is the predictive parameter for infection propagation. So it is just a one-line conclusion from the theory of branching process. So that is why this parameter is really important. And to know this parameter, we need not know the distribution. We need not know what is the actual form of the generating function of first generation progenies, because generally we do not know what is the distribution of the first generation progenies created by an infected person, right? So we do not need to know this generating function. What we try to calculate is what is the average number of newly created infected by taking the data, contact tracing data or any other data. We just take that what is the average number of people are infected by an existing infected person, that is defined as R naught, and if that R naught is less than equal to 1 we find, then we can say that no, this is okay, I mean now the infection will die out. But when R naught is greater than 1, we can say that infection has some probability that it will die out, but it may not die out for sure. I mean, it can go on increasing forever. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks. Yeah, that concludes my talk. And before taking other questions, let me answer Simon's question first. So just a minute. So Simon basically asked, yeah. So Simon, can you see this white background?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah. So what we had, that this was the diagonal line and this was the function for PS, right? And they intersected at 1 as well. And there was another intersection at sigma, for example, which is sigma is greater than 0. Now I have shown you that probability of going extinction x1 is less than equal to probability of going extinct at generation 2 and so on, right? At nth generation and so on. So what happens here? Now what is the probability that it will go extinct after first generation? So let us take x1. x1 is basically p evaluated at 0, because ps was the generating function for the first generation progenies, right? So p of 0 equal to x1. You are now convinced about this, right?
Yeah.
Now we have seen that there is an intersection at a point sigma where sigma is greater than 0. Correct?
Yeah.
So since p is an increasing function, so p0 must be less than equal to p of sigma, because sigma is greater than 0.
Yeah.
So this must be less than equal to p of sigma. Now sigma is a fixed point, right? Because at sigma the value of p is sigma itself, because it is on the diagonal line, right? So p of sigma equal to sigma, right?
Yeah.
And okay, so what we have got here is x1 less than equal to sigma, right? Now if I apply p again on this inequality, p of x1 must be less than equal to p of sigma, correct?
Yeah.
Because p is an increasing function, which is again sigma. Now what is p of x1? This is x2, because there was a recursive relation that p of p of xn minus 1 equal to xn, right? So this is x2. So x2 again less than equal to sigma, and if you just keep on operate, and so on and so forth. So all the xn's must be less than equal to sigma, and they have a limit. So this sequence, the probability of extinction at any generation, is bounded by sigma now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why.
So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sujit, for the very nice talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for
we'll see if people have some more questions they want to ask. They can go ahead.
Please.
Sujit, a general question about branching process. I mean, are there any studies about when will the population reach its maximum at nth generation, or what will be the maximum value of the population?
Yeah, because see, you you can calculate the generating function of nth generation, right? So from there you will get the all the probabilities just by taking the Taylor series coefficients, that what is the probability of getting any number of offsprings at nth generation. So from there you, I mean, just by looking at the Taylor series expansion, if that
Yeah.
expansion has a finite number of terms, then you will get that, okay, it will have, I mean, it can have only finite number of offsprings at the nth generation. But in principle, you can have infinite number of offsprings with some probability. The probability might be very less, but in general, like in our plant case, you can have infinite number of offsprings, but with very low probability. So
Yes.
there is no essential maximum. The maximum is infinity basically.
But still, for example, if we had I mean, simple random walk, I mean, there are questions like, like the particle reach its maxima at some,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah, something like similar for a branching process. I mean, have there been studies like that which compute the extreme values? I mean, extreme, when the extreme is reached, what is the probability that it will reach in the
Yeah, there are many studies on that, and I think if you just look at the work by Krishna Atre, I mean, who has done many works on this branching process. I mean, the branching process theory was, I mean, the rigorously studied by first by Harris, and after that Krishna Atre continued that study of branching process in a good extent. In a, so you can see the work by Krishna, or you can see the book by Krishna Atre. Actually, he's a professor, emeritus professor in IISc right now, IISc math department.
Okay.
So you can look at that book. You will get many things, I mean, many variations. I mean, there are variations when these plants when these particles are age. I mean, after age they can produce, and after that age they cannot produce. I mean, there are many variations, and there are many complicated situations which can arise, and there are many studies on that. Yeah, and what you are asking, yeah, there are studies on the extreme values, or how, what is the maximum value of particles. There are many studies on that, I guess. Yeah, if you just look at the literature, you can just search by these keywords. I think you will get it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So I was asking that, basically if the mean of that, let's say in this case, the Poisson distribution is greater than 1, then you have basically exponential growth, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so,
With some probability. If the particle does not go extinct. See, when the
right, yes,
mean, yeah, when the mean is greater than equal to greater than 1, it still has some probability of extinction, right?
yes, yes,
Sorry, yeah, it still has some probability of extinction, but the probability that it does not go extinct, I mean, is much can be higher. So in that case, you will get many
yes.
number of offsprings. Yeah,
So with some finite probability, it basically grows exponentially,
absolutely, yes,
right?
correct.
Okay, so now, like, suppose you wanted to study like this usual infection process in this with this.
Yeah.
So there, of course, you have finite population, right? So it can't just
Yes.
keep going up exponentially, like it's
Yeah.
only in the initial phase. So can you
Yeah.
like modify this to account for that, and then
Yes, for finite population, if you want to modify it, then you need to so the problem with the finite population is, when the infection grows in a finite population, then the susceptible number of susceptible decreases, right? So now number of the like the distribution of generating new infections, that changes. So that is not again that IID random variables, the distribution of newly created offsprings, that is not the same as what it was in the initial phase of the infection. So
yeah,
this branching process model can be applied either in the initial phase of infection, or in an hypothetical infinite population, where the people can go and come in the population. I mean, there is no conservative population. So then only this can be applied. or otherwise if you can track, I mean numerically of course you can do it. I mean if you want to do, I mean numeric calculations, and if you keep track at every step, I mean how many particles are getting infected and how many are susceptible, then you can keep track and find out what is the probability that the what is the distribution of the new offsprings at nth generation, then you can of course study it. Yeah, but that needs quite a lot of numerics or numerical computations.
Sujit, I have a question.
Yeah, please, Sam.
Yeah. Suppose P prime is exactly equal to 1, then
Yeah.
instead of exponential growth, do you get something like a power law for the growth? Or?
No, if P prime is exactly equal to 1, it goes extinct again with probability 1.
Yeah, but what decides that? Why does 1 go with less than 1 rather than greater than 1?
I see. So this is this can be answered by probably this calculation. So here, whenever this, yeah, right. Your question is absolutely valid.
Fixed points are going to merge. That's what will happen, right? The two fixed points.
Right, right. I understood your point. Just let me think a bit. Yeah. So what happens when the average number is equal to 1?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So let me try to answer it. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Can you see this whiteboard again? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. So we have the recursive relation like P of P of xn. No. Like the nth iterate of P equal to P of n minus 1th iterate of P. Right. Now, if I just take the derivative now by this way, probability of going extinction. Yeah, right. I mean, that has a very beautiful explanation, but I just missed it. Let's say probability of going extinction is xn at nth generation, which is P of xn minus 1. I mean, there was a, 4 to 5 line explanation. I mean, and it was really cool. I mean, but I'm not getting it right now.
It's okay. We can discuss it later.
Yeah. Maybe I'll look at it and definitely send it to you. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking this question. That was a very nice question. Yeah.
There's one more question in the chat box by Kumar Shivam, who asks, how do we know that the number of seeds produced by a given species of plant is Poissonian?
Yeah, I mean, that is a model again. I mean, no model is perfect. So it may not be Poissonian. It may not be, it may be some other distributions as well. But what my point was is like, if I mean, in general it could be Poissonian, because in this kind of random process, I mean, when the events happen in a memoryless process or something like that, that means the plant doesn't know when it needs to produce a seed. I mean, if it is a memoryless process and when it produced the previous seed, and it does not depend when the next seed is produced, like memoryless process in typical, then it is reasonable to assume the Poisson distribution for producing number of seeds. But this is just a model, but it can be any other model as well, it can be any other distributions as well. But for to show an example, I just took the Poisson distribution.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think people don't have any more questions. So thank you, Sujit, for the nice talk.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sujit, can I ask one more question?
Yeah, क्यों नहीं, पूछो, please ask.
When the number of offspring is exactly one, then we don't expect that population to go extinct every time it is producing only one offspring.
Sujita, I'll add to that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
हाँ, पहले तो
हाँ, keep your
so
video
I'm
on.
saying, so I'm saying कि like there was an equation x equal to px, which was supposed to be the solution to find the extinction probability, right?
Right.
X equal
right.
to px. So now
Correct.
if I take the derivative on both sides, I have p prime x equals 1.
Wait. Let me get a pen. Sorry.
So p prime x equals 1 means that the p prime is, so the lines overlap, right?
Yeah. Tell me again.
No, I was just thinking, like if I take derivative on both sides.
Oh, x equal to px, you cannot take derivative. Sorry.
That's at a particular x, right?
X equal to px. X equal to px will not always be satisfied.
It will only be satisfied at L.
Correct. It will only be satisfied at L. Correct.
Okay. No, so because I was trying to think if the derivative becomes, like if p prime 1 becomes equal to 1, so it means that the that the extinction is at, like the intersection is at 1, right?
Intersection is at 1 or at some point. Acha, if probability of going extinct is 1, then intersection must be at 1.
But that's the only solution, right? There is no other solution.
There is no other solution.
So then it's supposed to be extinct, no? I didn't understand.
Yes.
The problem is,
when the intersection is at 1, it will must extinct.
Okay, so even when p okay. But the problem is to see why at p prime 1 equal to 1, it actually for sure becomes extinct, right? Like that was Sam's question. Like for p prime at 1 equal to 1, why is it actually siding with the extinction and not with the non-extinction?
Now probably I can. Okay, let me share my screen again. Yeah. So what we had, no, p prime 1 is not 1 actually. P prime.
No, so the statement is that if like p prime at 1 is equal to 1, like it will go extinct for sure, and that's what Sam asked.
Right. See. Right. So p prime 1 equal to 1. That means we had the plot, this is the diagonal line, and p prime something like this, right? So this is 1, and p prime 1 equal to 1 means this tangent and this diagonal line intersects, correct?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is the extinction probability, which is 1. Right. Now the way I answer your question, if I just go by that, so all of xn, that means the probability of going extinct at nth generation must be less than equal to the intersection point, which is now 1. Correct. And this is a monotonically increasing sequence, because x1 was less than equal to x2 and so on, right? Now it is bounded by 1, and we can see that they can only intersect at 1. Yeah, so that means the minimum value at which this px equal to x is satisfied, that x equal to 1, that is the probability of extinction must be 1. So this must be come through p prime 1 equal to 1, right? Which was Sam's question. So is it convincing or not? Very rigorous, I guess, still, but it should be something like this.
Okay. पूरी तरह से convince नहीं हूँ.
That we need to. Okay, maybe.
Small question.
Yeah. Yes.
Now here I saw that you did the whole calculation for those kind of probability distribution where sample space has events 0, 1, 2, 3 countable numbers. Will it go through if I calculate, let's say, for Gaussian distribution where the random variable itself can take all values of the real?
No, branching process is always integral valued, because you cannot give birth to a 1.5 child. I mean, it has to be either 1, 2, 3, 4. It will always be integral valued. So branching process modeling, yeah. So in theory, if you ask, in theory, whether we can go for the general distributions which are non-integral valued, then this generating function method will not work. Then you have to take characteristic functions and Laplace transforms, things like that, because generating function is only defined for your integral valued random variables, like because you need to sum like p0 plus p1s plus p2s square and so on.
Okay.
So I think yeah, I mean, in branching process theory, all the random variables are basically integral valued, and so hence there are countable number of events. The event space contains countable number of points.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.